Thank you again, everyone, for being here, taking out a little time in your day for what hopefully is a really interesting and informative conversation all about theming in complex ecosystems. And we're going to get into what we mean by that and why we're talking about this right now. And we're excited to have you hear from our panelists and get some of your questions answered as well. Before we go too far, shameless plug for what we'll be up to around this time next month. We do host these large webinars every month. Next month, we're going to be focusing on the theme of what really matters in design systems. We talk with a lot of teams focused on a lot of different things and stacking up requirements and priorities differently as collaborative teams, individually across teams, and helping make sense of it all, how we see teams successfully navigating design system journeys. Come here from members of our team and some of our experience, as well as some of our friends. With that, so I'm Andrew. I lead the customer-facing teams here at Knapsack and have a lot of conversations, it seems, lately about this subject in particular. We have some really great panelists here that we're going to bring on the virtual stage here just in a few minutes. Skim is a member of the solutions engineering team here at Knapsack and spends a lot of time in the depths of design system journeys and enabling them with our customers, in addition to her own experience in the space. Donnie here is an active member of the design system community on top of his work at GoDaddy. And Mark Reynolds as well is someone with a lot of experience in this space, having navigated these journeys, someone we partner with frequently here at Knapsack to bring value to teams navigating these journeys. So I'm excited to bring them all on, and you can hear from them their own introductions and from their experience. But first, just to set a little bit of context on what this conversation is and why we're having it. We want to go through what do we mean by theming. We may think that's obvious, but leave no stone unturned here. So we're going to be very clear on what we mean by theming in this conversation, as well as complex and complexity. We work with a lot of teams, and it shows up a lot of different ways. And also a little bit of the context. I think you no doubt have some assumptions. You see some of it in the subtitle here, but why is this a particular conversation and area of focus right now? Theming and brand application and styling have been around for quite some time. So let's set a little context, and then you'll hopefully hear a lot less from me and more from the people who really know what they're talking about as we get into the panel. And then I'll plug next month's webinar again, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A here before we're done. So as we go, drop your questions in the Q&A in Zoom or in the chat. We have a couple of people monitoring that, and we'll try and answer as many as we can live and follow up with the others. And we will, of course, record this and share. So what do we mean by theming? Again, some may seem obvious. We want to be really clear here. So in this case, we're talking about theming as defining and implementing the appearance of a user interface that can adjust and adapt based on context. And even that, the context piece, has some disambiguation to be done, right? So that can be a user's action, right? Something that happens even as simple as just different states that happen when a user hovers. That can be something like an implementation decision, a white label design system that can be implemented in different brands or different themes or styles. And there's also, the sort of more automated things, right? Your phone is sensing when there's light and not light in the sensor, and that determines, whether it's light or dark mode, right? So, but fundamentally really about the sort of application of not just styling, but the creation of the appearance of a user interface. And what do we mean by complex? So again, complexity shows up in a lot of different ways, right? We have teams that have dozens and dozens of brands they're managing in a white label system. We have teams with one product and one brand, and it's still really complex, right? So just a handful of ways it shows up here. Just organizing dozens or hundreds of humans to operate cohesively is in and of itself a complex initiative. Obviously, if there are a lot of technologies you're supporting, different product experiences, legacy, technology that you're still living with, or you're in that scenario where you do have a lot of brands, right? Either different flavors of a brand within, one umbrella, or distinct individual brands, maybe even brands that show up different regionally. There can be obviously a lot of complexity there in constructing those interfaces. From a tooling standpoint, this is something we'll get into a little more here throughout this conversation. Purely in digital production, the idea of doing something in Figma and aligning it to something in code, for example, the tools themselves operate so differently that alone creates complexity in trying to orchestrate expectations and how we work. And just trying to do this all at any sort of scale, right? There's resources you're trying to figure out how to manage, and we all know what's happened to resourcing and staffing plans in the last several months. You've got human behavior change and cultural change management to try and navigate to get any of this stuff actually, integrated in the way a whole organization works, right? So there's a lot of complexity, even if you don't think of your brand or your set of themes, as complex. The operation and trying to get to sustainable success with a practice is going to face some challenges and complexity. And then why now? I don't know if anyone's been paying attention, but the last few months feel a little bit like the Wild West when it comes to especially cross-functional collaboration and end-to-end workflows for implementing theming, right? No doubt a big part of that has been some explosion of superpowers in design tools in particular. Many of us were probably paying attention at Config a couple of months ago. Figma variables, long awaited, really, introducing new capabilities, but also with them expectations in the design and earlier stage creative process on how theming should work and be implemented, that then is going to have implications downstream, right? That we're going to need to figure out. And we're already seeing sort of pros and cons there. Token Studio for a long time now has been providing some of those, style management capabilities within the design tool, as well as finding ways to, make it easier to get that stuff integrated with downstream disciplines. But, all of them are introducing these new capabilities and concepts, particularly around theming, that, aren't plug and play, right? Knapsack spends a lot of time in between different functions. How do we connect design workflows as seamlessly as possible to engineering workflows? So brand and design decisions end up being able to ship, CSS and mobile styling. That's a lot harder in the last 2 months, right? Part of the reason is this third piece, the W3C spec. Donnie here is a part of that community. I'm sure he'll speak a little bit to it. We're getting past the point of what the community has collectively decided on in terms of how we implement this stuff. There's nothing even in this draft specification that's not even formal to account for a lot of this sort of complex theming, right? So what that means is, again, it's a little bit the Wild West, right? And not to disappoint, but we're not going to answer all these things for you today. We're not going to give you all the solutions. But I think, if there's nothing else you take out of today, hopefully a little empathy of understanding that, if it feels like there's no clear right answer and it's hard to figure out how the pieces come together, you're not alone. But also, how to start to think about some of this stuff and what the future might be able to look like. So hopefully we'll have some great takeaways while we're still working all together as an industry to, really crack some of these things in a repeatable way. So that's enough of hearing from me. Thank you for bearing with a couple slides. I do want to invite our panelists onto the stage, our wonderful, comfortable digital couch that is Zoom. So thank you all. Come on over. I will be quiet for a moment and let you all go around and maybe just share, a little bit of, who you are and sort of the experience you bring to this that's sort of relevant to the conversation. Skim, you're first on the slide. We'll go ahead and start with you.
All right, cool. Hey, I'm Skim. I'm relatively new to Knapsack, but I have been working with design systems since 2018 and have been working in tech and engineering for much longer than that. But in my experience with design systems, while I've technically been an engineer, I've kind of been on, I've taken on a lot of roles, as we all know that design system teams often tend to be pretty scrappy. So I've also worked in the product management space, Scrum Master. I've done some design, just kind of all over the place, working on a variety of different design systems over the past years, and different points of maturity, although generally more towards the beginning. So yeah, I'm happy to be joining Knapsack and helping other people kind of figure out this sort of uncomfortable beginning spot, because there's not really it's not very glamorous. People don't really write about it. We write about it a bit, but yeah, it's there's a lot to talk about there in this kind of beginning to tame the chaos of design systems.
Awesome. Donnie?
Super. Hi, my name is Donnie D'Amato, and thanks for having me on the webinar today. I'm a principal engineer at GoDaddy. I've been in charge of their design system for the past 4 years now, and prior to that, I was the first UX engineer at Compass, where we created their design system and design system team there. I also teach user research and at Parsons School of Design here in New York. And I've also founded a design system consultancy company called Design Systems House, which I launched back in June, just about the time of Config, where dedicated to the future of design systems and really trying to understand where this practice will be going in the next 5, 10, 20 years and how we could get there faster. So Also, as Andrew mentioned, I am involved with the Design Tokens community group and have a lot of ideas and contributions most recently going on in there as well. Lots of interesting things that I think hopefully we could talk about a little bit today that might pave the course for new ideas in theming.
Awesome. Mark?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, again, I'm Mark Reynolds, and appreciate being here with Knapsack and everybody on this webinar. I spend most of my time working with enterprise organizations on their design system practice. So trying to set up a design system practice for success. I've worked across like the National Health Service in the UK, through to all sorts of different sized enterprises and organizations. Again, setting up these practices and going through all the different stages, all the different parts of the journey of a design system. And one of the things that is always there and will always be there is this exact thing that we're talking about today, this complexity around theming, bringing in token structures and all those types of things. So I spend a lot of time educating and coaching and mentoring around all of these subjects, with the teams at the enterprises that I'm consulting with. And I have my own kind of independent kind of consulting side. I work a lot with Knapsack's customers, and I'm also trying to support the industry with talent through Autonomy too. So so doing a lot of those things, and that's what I'm up to and why I'm here today.
Awesome. Well, Mark, maybe I'll use the jumping off point based on that. You spend a lot of time in the weeds of this stuff. We spoke to it a little bit, but how have you seen just sort of this part of the industry and this landscape shift in the last, I don't know, couple of months, 2-3 months? Like, what has it felt like there's a noticeable change in how these, especially complex situations, are being approached?
Well, the first thing is that they're actually being approached, and like people are taking into consideration that they can solve this problem. Prior to now, and prior to the maturity where we are today, it felt like an issue that like kind of gets put to the side or wasn't being addressed as much. So based on the things that are coming out or have come out of late, with the tooling, with approaches, with like the specs that we're looking at now, and that have come into fruition, we've got at least elements, we've got pieces of information that we can actually construct like solutions around. So that's like a huge move and a huge shift for me. Even the fact that we are taking these things that we now know as complex token structures and theming, and actually applying solutions to them to deliver those outcomes. One of the things that I see a lot of, and the things that are being solved now, are actually the multi-brand side. So I know complexity comes in different sizes, right? So complexity at the bottom, a single component can be complex, but the things that I deal with most, and I try and help construct, are the multi-theme, like multi-brand, kind of like ecosystems. And what I'm seeing today is enablement in that space where we can actually now have a global kind of token set, and then with that global set, we can also then start to apply brand and what I call it at some point, and maybe we'll get into details soon, brand theming, for each one of those brands attached to, say, this global token structure. So yeah, that's what I've seen. That's what I've seen and dealing with a lot at the moment, which is super exciting. I'm so happy to see it come into fruition like it has done today.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the things I think I've heard from a lot of folks in different disciplines, especially after config, right, is excitement. Token Studio has been phenomenal and enabled a lot, but seeing something come in a native tool is always like got a different level of gravity to, especially an influential tool like Figma in the space. But also, they've acknowledged the things that it doesn't do, and there's like excitement that we're all approaching this in a way that's real now and actually trying to solve the problem head on, but also it isn't fully solved, right? And so particularly, again, we see that in the design to engineering flows where great, the variables maps well to the concept of CSS variables, but what do we do at the token level, right? What's this dynamic token value kind of thing that we run into. Donnie, I know you've thought about that, and we can stick in the world of kind of theming, and coming from an engineering kind of standpoint, what are you seeing in terms of new opportunities or challenges in that, like the translation stage where we go from, hey, great, design's thinking about this more kind of strategically, but I got to implement this. Like, what are you experiencing in that part of the workflow?
Well, the thing I think is the challenge really is at the semantic token level, and let me explain that a little bit. Historically, when an engineer has been creating some, from some mock-up a web page or a component or something like that, oftentimes for a long time we've been handing off tokens that are essentially color blue 500 or something like that, that truly just go a one for one. I want this blue in this one spot. And we've learned over time, especially through things like dark mode, that direct correlation just won't scale. And that's been taking a lot of time, both from design and engineers, to rewire their brains to stop thinking about, I want this specific blue, to kind of explaining why that blue needs to be there. Because we don't, with the semantic token and just the semantic design methodology, what we're really doing is encoding our decisions as designers and engineers into reusable kind of chunks. And those are the semantic tokens that we usually talk about. So that when we're talking about the background color of the button, we're not putting, the blue there. We're saying it's a button's background color. And in some other curation process, that's where we assign the blue to the primary background color of the button. So separating that so that an engineer is just putting these tokens in and might not get the results that they're expecting from the mockups, we need to normalize that as actually being okay, and a conversation that may have to happen that says, hey, I wasn't expecting, green to appear here. Why is green happening here? And that ends up becoming more of an education, right? Because again, like I said, 20 years, we've been putting, hex codes on background colors, directly. And now we're really separating concerns here about exactly what the UI responsibilities are, what the UX responsibilities are, and also what the engineering responsibilities are. And really separating those responsibilities out so that those folks in those positions can make the right choices, as opposed to kind of putting them all into one big kind of mess that we've done for a long time. So it's really an education, I think, situation, because the folks who know about that ecosystem, basically the way that those tokens are supposed to be set up, regardless of naming, the folks that know about those tokens understand the impact and the ability of those tokens once they're set up. But the fact of the matter is that, and as most of the folks at Knapsack know, we're dealing with large organizations and legacy systems that just aren't ready sometimes for that change of mindset. And really, it's a matter of just kind of that education piece. And that's where the struggle's been that I've seen.
Yeah, so I want to come back in a little bit to, some of what you spoke to also gets into like some of the implementation of those things is changing, right? It's great that we all align that it should be, the token is about the button background color, but the mechanism by which that knows how to change, now there's a whole new suite of those mechanisms in design. And what do those mean for, like, it not all just rely on SAS mapping anymore, right? So I want to get back to that a little bit, but you touched on a broader thing that, Skim, I'm curious your input on, that kind of relates back to, how do you get started with all of this, which is, the reality of doing any of this in the enterprise, right? Let's even go beyond theming is, it's not just roll out your first component and create a theming mechanism, right? It's human change management, it's legacy tech, right? It's figuring out how to get design and engineering to talk to each other. So like, frankly, even beyond the scope of this exact topic, like how do you approach that piece, right? Because if we can't approach this together as a collaborative effort, we're probably doomed from the start, right? No team can just decide how it's going to work for everyone, especially given kind of new tools. So like, what advice would you give to teams that are just trying to get started, whether it's about tokens and themings or just like getting started with a clean foundation?
Sure. My first thing is, what I absolutely love about working in design systems is that you have to realize that what you're building needs to work for other brains. Like you are the one who's building it. It makes perfect sense to you. The documentation is going to make perfect sense to you, but you have to build it to make sure other people can. So like, back when we were all in offices, I remember just like spinning my chair around and like whatever engineers were like behind me and be like, hey, does this thing make sense to you? Kind of like, do you know how to consume this? Which, we have to go to Slack to do that a little bit more, but getting used to that sort of mindset of how are users going to use this rather than being so focused as an engineer of like, this is how it's used. Like I kind of, it takes a while to like get in that brain space, but I really personally love it. And yeah, we ran into a similar thing with like tokens where it's like, okay, no, we can't have them like be colored. We have to name them after their what they do. And I've been used to that in CSS. And it's nice when you're starting out, like as scary as it is when you're starting out, especially with everything that we have now with Token Studio and just all the like thought leadership we have now. It's much easier to start out fresh than like, I guess, have something that's like legacy and try to adapt it. I've done both, where it's like, oh, cool, we have this thing from like a couple years ago that we need to adapt, but there's been so many changes. Like we need to add design tokens, which is doable, but there's like that moment when you're like starting out or you're getting your whole team on board to be like, hey, let's do this, where you have that fresh perspective and you're like, let's use all the stuff that we've learned, like that's come out recently. And like, there's new stuff coming out all the time. And it's so exciting, like thinking about helping build out a design system in like 2018 or 2019, like those are totally different questions than the kinds that we're asking now. And like, it's also fun to look back and be like, hey, like some of the assumptions we made then that seemed like really like, this is the way things are going. You're totally wrong. And like, that's okay. And I think that's kind of fun where it's like, the sort of, you're going like it's always going to be a learning process. It's always going to be a learning process. It's definitely going to be a collaboration process. You definitely have to like understand how like different minds work and consume things. And yeah, keep up to date with all of the things that are changing and embrace them.
Yeah. I mean, it's why most folks these days are fond of saying the design system is like a product, but it's more than that. It's an operational imperative, right? It's a way of functioning as a product org. And even if you have a really good one and everything's going great, it's still going to require a lot of continual investment because standards change and technology changes. And so it's, embracing the iterative mindset on all of it, right? That's core. Whether it's, I even see questions coming in that's going to be part of the answer, right? Is, how do I approach, changing the tires on a moving product organization? And they're like, we got to start somewhere. We got to be humble. We got to focus on the human element, and we got to expect that we're going to be wrong plenty, and like build the idea of continual iteration. And teams that spent, whether it's theming or whatever, teams that spend 6 months in a cave because they did a great inventory and they know what's going to work, and then they hand it down. I've never seen it work, right? Because that's not accommodating for the realities of your product org. Again, whether it's theming or anything else, right? So I appreciate that.
I would also add to that. Sorry, just on like the change management piece and working like cross multiple teams in these complex environments, you do have to go through and set up, as part of your design system, as part of your your processes, an actual education program almost. So you actually develop like workshops, you invite people in to learn more about it, and not being surprised that a lot of people that might be adopting this in the near future, or that already are, don't actually know about it, and that's okay. Like you're there to support them in understanding like theming, at this level, even understanding like the nuances of tokens and token sets, like as part of theming. So it's really important from what I see and my perspective to actually develop that educational kind of work stream throughout the entire process. So yeah, just to add to that.
Yeah, and to that point, like I've worked at companies where once you have the education piece, things start to go a lot faster because you have everyone on board. Once you're like, you can have those conversations and people know that they can have those conversations with you on other teams. Like that's what really gets your design system like really becoming robust and getting you that level of support. Once you even just start that education, get people excited to talk about it, like things grow in a wonderful way. So yeah, I agree.
Education and also just engagement. We talk nonstop about engagement. I was like, you want to make your design system work, even if you're in the cave for 6 months, like you got to engage people constantly, right? Get whoever's going to be excited about it, get them to give you feedback, get them to serve, like, don't do an inventory with screenshots, get people to send you React components and Figma files, right? Engage them in the process so that they're not a bunch of adults being told how to do their job 3 months from now, whenever you want to roll it out to them. And actually, we're going to get to more Q&A later, but I actually want to bring up one of the questions because it's so relevant to this. Just on the subject of making sure your system works for others that you brought up, Skim, how do you manage a scenario where you need complex system to support multi-brand theming, but your users don't have the level of understanding to acknowledge why there even needs to be constraints, or how to go about evolving the constraints? So really, in my mind, abstracting that a little bit, the question is, we know how we want to operate, but that change isn't something that happens overnight, right? How do you kind of bake in what we're talking about, this iteration and feedback loop, to achieve that, whether it's multi-brand theming in a legacy environment with folks that are working 5 years, old in that way, or like, how do you go about sort of trying to get to that future state, knowing it's going to have to start probably, less sophisticated than what you want to get to? Anyone, question for the group. Change is easy, right? That's the answer.
The way that I've done it is, there's it has been essentially on the communication side, is again making sure you're inviting everyone to have these conversations and like understand, like you want to make sure everyone is asking questions, because like people are going to have questions that you don't even like. You can plan for questions, but people are going to ask you questions that you're like, I have never even thought about that, or use cases where you're like, I've never thought about that. So you, like, as much as like education, is really helpful, it goes both ways of like, you have to get those questions, you have to understand how people are using it, you have to empower people to be like, if they're like, oh, I feel like this is a silly question, like, no, there's really no silly question unless it's completely unrelated and it's like, how many lizards can you fit in a box? I don't know, that might be weird, but if you find a way to relate it, sure. But yeah, like getting the questions is really important. Getting like, that is some of the most important feedback you can get. But starting that dialogue is the real tough part, and like empowering people to come to you with those questions.
Are they Schrodinger's lizards? I'm intrigued about the lizards now, but
now it's a silly question. It's unrelated.
There's no silly question. I think this all, if we build a theme around this, I would say a lot of this is community, right? So a huge part of adoption and that again, the adoption stream of a design system is around community. So really opening the doors and really inviting everyone in, giving them a place to do that, whether you're in Teams or Slack or whatever it is, setting up like weekly get-togethers, even getting teams to showcase what they're doing and operating with the design system in front of everyone to see and question, all those types of things, all those community activities that we're probably like a lot more familiar with just in our general workday and everything now. Like, make sure the design system is part of that, and that does exactly what Skim was just saying there, where you get those questions and you get to answer them openly, like in that environment, like people can question it, and then what you get, this for me is when the special moments happen, is when other people, like in other product teams, are answering other product team questions, and that's when you get to see them, like kind of the magic where you're developing that community, those theming questions, those token questions, that branding's in the conversation, and they're all answering each other's questions and stuff. So and that all takes part, the education, the understanding, the delivery of the actual the token sets and stuff. So yeah, community is huge, and is a massive enabler of this.
That's what
something I wanted to say about Andrew, you mentioned about trying to bring the last kind of people on board. They're wondering why we need to do this. Why does this happen? And I think it does go back to that encoding purpose scenario that I was saying about. We were talking about semantic tokens, but I think that really is the way of systems work, is encoding the reasons why we're doing these things. At the end of the day, I actually really don't care what color the button is as a design system maintainer. I actually have no care whatsoever. And quite frankly, I'd much rather it be by committee, where people who do have an opinion about what color this thing should be go in, hash it out and come out with a color. Totally fine, as long as, of course, as it's accessible and localized, performant. It has the right tap areas, all that kind of stuff. Actually, one of the examples I love to use is GoDaddy's primary button is black in most markets, except in China. In China, the black button actually is a bad thing. It's just not something that they would want to press necessarily. So in that market, we actually have to change that color from black to our GoDaddy teal. So even just that idea or concept to let people know there's reasons why these things need to allow for these changes, bring people a little bit closer to the reason why we're doing this at all, right? Because otherwise, yeah, just keep the buttons the same color the whole way through. But there's cultural reasons and accessibility reasons and user preference reasons that are coming through that require these kinds of changes. And like we said all the way in the beginning, it really is an education piece. But I would really kind of like to kind of stand on my soapbox about saying again that I don't care what the final values of these tokens are right at the end of the day, right? As long as everyone agrees on this is the direction that we want to go and it's good for our users, I'm not going to go ahead and stop anyone from making the button yellow as long as the text is black. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I mean, preach. We are big believers that everything we hope to get out of our design systems is about the way of working, period, right? I would rather have everyone reuse and feel they can contribute to the worst button component ever than have the best button component ever that nobody's using, right? Because if we're embracing the idea of reusing stuff that's working well and iterating on stuff that's working well as a priority over creating things, and then create things when it's intentional and we need to, and do what we were talking, like this two-way conversation, right? It's not about fundamental just enablement. It's about, again, capturing what's working. We don't know that if we're not the people doing all the frontline work, and I don't want to be the only team that's managing this stuff, right? So if you can embrace and support those ways of working with the right tooling, like, great. We have customers that have no design system, and that's what our platform does, right? Enable that way of working. We have customers who are going through the change management with the legacy stuff and the new theming, but like, it's all about embracing the way of working, empowering folks to contribute back. So I love that. I do want to wrench us back a little bit more to some of the core topic at hand of theming complex ecosystems. I'm going to toss it back to you again, Donnie, just as someone who thinks a lot about this, has written about this space, is trying to contribute stuff to the spec. Like, I guess broadly, specifically in the world of theming, we can even take, multi-brand, as I know there's a lot of questions about that. Like, what are you excited about right now? What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing just in kind of the state of the state with, orchestrating a workflow for effectively defining and implementing, the type of appearance we're talking about? Like, give us your thoughts on the state of the state.
Yeah, so the state of the state is kind of crazy, because what basically I'm in my mind already is the GitHub issue for the Design Tokens Community Group. It's issue number 210. It's ingrained in my mind, and that's the one where Jake from Figma comes in and says, "Hey guys, what do we ever think about themes and modes?" And it is an absolute just anarchy in there, honestly. Because there's lots of different approaches that people are doing or want to do that, their mental models make sense for, right? And there's a lot of things like you see like these different token structures where there's like a whole bunch of nesting to get to the dark mode, and the dark mode with this brand and the dark mode with that brand. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going down there. And there's other ways of referencing tokens within tokens, and it's just there's a lot of incredible ideas that is happening in there. And admittedly, I'm a little biased because I like simple, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for things to actually be simple. And I say that being the creator of token operations, which if you look at token operations, it looks complex, but in reality, it's meant to be simple again. If you really look at the foundational parts, and if people have questions about that, definitely reach out to me in the socials, because I love talking about that. Because I don't think we'll have a lot of time here, but that's a lot of the complexity there, and just in terms of how do you author something that is meant to be multi-brand or even multi-theme aware. I think they're kind of interchangeable in some ways. So how do you author that kind of thing? That is a point of contention across lots of different people, lots of people that have different ideas because they need to support this or that or whatever. I also want to point out something that came up very recently. I'm saying 2 days ago, there was an issue raised for a new type of token inside of the community group, which is meant to solve for data visualizations. Now, that's really interesting because that's one of the groups of tokens that I've always thought as something as an outlier. And these tokens typically end up being like for, avatar groups, different colors of avatars. You're talking maybe about areas of illustrations. These are areas where we apply color to segregate other areas from each other. And unfortunately, there's no real semantic way of doing that, which is why everyone starts, again, kind of having these token lists of different colors that they just assign directly, like we used to do. Color red 500 goes right here. And I've been doing a lot of work in that space as well on the side that it tries to do a little bit better in terms of the semantic parts of that. But that section there is a challenge in terms of trying to describe from a multi-brand theming level. And what this person has proposed in there is to create this new token, which is basically token lists, which has a whole bunch of lists of tokens in there. And I respond to that in a couple of different ways of that's a very interesting idea. And I'm saying this and saying for the folks that are watching this webinar right now is please contribute into these discussions, because these discussions are really shaping the way that eventually our tools are going to read these values, right? And that's why that issue number 210 has so much involvement in there, is because that's theming, as this webinar says, is a big piece. So I'm super excited about, what token operations could bring in terms of helping out that multi-brand help and theming scenario. But the data visualization piece is probably one of the harder pieces, because I think everything else is mostly solved between, actionable stuff, input stuff, feedback stuff. Most of that stuff is solved through semantic tokens. There are some challenges when it comes to spacing. I have solutions for that I've done work for as well. That again is a total mind shift. But those are the challenges that I'm seeing out there, and the conversations that are happening. And I also appreciate a lot of the folks that are in the space, like Token Studio, like Specify, that are also defining their own kind of token structures to get ahead of the spec in some ways, because the spec is moving slowly. It's in the same kind of open source community that us design system maintainers are sitting in, where we're trying to hear all the different people and get the right solution out of all of that input. So that's why, when people are thinking about design systems are slow and they're blocking me, it's because we're trying to get all the feedback so we provide the right thing. And that's the same thing with community group. We're trying to get all the right feedback in there, and that's why it's moving slow. But areas or organizations like Token Studio and Specify are moving faster because they're their own platforms, right? They're just going in and they're solving the problems. They're moving fast and making solutions, and hopefully in some ways actually influencing what the final result of this stuff will be.
Yeah, well, and I agree. It's awesome. There's more innovation happening, and they're able to move faster. And at the same time, it's in some ways the source of a little bit of the chaos. And this is not we love the Token Studio group. We friends at Figma, the Specify folks, but it's what's gotten us into a place where I guess one of my biggest takeaways for all this, and if you all listening take away one thing, it's as Donnie said earlier, like we got to talk cross-functionally, right? There's more than ever, we are empowered individually in different functions to make decisions of what works well for us, and in theory, what works well for everyone. And there's all kinds of implications of that, and it can all work, right? You can use variables and then use styles for typography and use a plugin for an API or convert it into Token Studio. Like there's all kinds of different ways, but if we're not thinking about how is it working in design and how is it getting into product through engineering, through tokens, where can we automate and create scale? Like if we're not looking at that holistically, we're gonna run into a lot of challenges, 100%, right? So it's again, one takeaway, talk as much as you can, plan for that iteration, and that you're gonna keep talking a lot. I want to pivot a little bit and open it up to go through some of the questions. Please ask more questions, but we got a ton of questions, and I think it'd be great to dig into some of them. And some of them relate to themes that we were kind of thinking about in our prep anyway. So, want to bring. There's some spicy ones here. I want to talk a little bit about brand, actually. So the question as writ is, how do you reconcile when brand teams want unique customizations for their theme, which break or conflict with any type of ecosystem alignment, with semantic tokens. And I want to turn it to our experts, but like my perspective from what I do working with our customers is like if we've reached that point, we've missed some conversations, right? Because aligning how we have an implementation approach, like our implementation approach to the realities of what we need to account for in brand scenarios, like needs to be one of those conversations, right? And one thing we talked about that I want to kind of open it up to is, yeah, how do you account for that scenario? But more importantly, how have you successfully included brand in the design system operation? Because we see that as a huge like accelerant for teams, especially when there's like multiple system efforts in a big company. Get aligned with brand, and also it quickly becomes a question if like why aren't we doing that? If we're having this whole theming conversation about brand expression, and we run into things like this where what brand wants to do conflicts with what we want to do in a system. So how do you all do that? How do you align the system effort and involve brand? Donnie's talked a lot recently. So Mark, I'm gonna throw it to you. You've done this in big companies recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with like the top level kind of process stuff, around the change management, which is first of all, like whenever you're doing whether you're years in, whether you're at the start, whether you're super mature, like you have to speak with these leads and the leads teams in brand and marketing, and that actually is a part of your auditing process. So as part of the auditing process, you go through, interviews, which you do multiple rounds throughout the year of these interviews, gathering feedback, but they should have always been and should always be part of the conversations at the beginning of any of this. And actually what that does is set the tone that they are as important as, product design and engineering, and they're all part of the conversation that you're having around this. And what it does is then bring the information that they're provided from their perspective, into either the centralized design system team or the cross-functional or the slightly cross-company approach for design system teams. But it brings it into the conversation, and what you're able to do is then shape up certain things. So we'll get a little bit into the weeds here, but it shapes up certain things like scales, whether that's your animation duration scales, whether that's your, all the different sort of radiuses, etc. And that, I know it sounds a bit specific, but you'll actually then end up expanding what you enable, what you make as a capability based on those conversations that you're having or have had with brand and marketing. So first thing, make sure that they're part of the auditing interview process, and they support your development of recommendations for the design system itself.
Donnie, Skim, any other advice around brand and how you've successfully or unsuccessfully involved them in your experience?
Ladies first. Okay, I'll go. It's kind of what I mentioned earlier, that I don't have an opinion about what the color is, right? But who does have an opinion? Brand. Boy, does brand have an opinion, right? And those are the folks that you want to put in to that kind of collaboration meeting and that alignment meeting that goes, hey, you have a stake in the colors, the topography, you have a stake in the way that this thing looks. Come in here with your idea, your concept, your the things that you want to do, and bring it up and see if it sticks with the rest of the organization, right? As a partnership. Because at the end of the day, if they want it to be blue and nobody else says that they want it to be something else, it's blue. With certain guidelines, right? Again, we bring it back to accessibility, of course. Make sure things are have proper contrast, and sometimes bringing brand in there is the most challenging thing in terms of this ecosystem, right? Because traditionally, brands have been doing a lot of things that are print and not necessarily dynamic media. So getting them up to speed often to let them know about the different kind of ecosystem that they're working in can be a challenge, certainly, about those constraints that exist there. But past that, we talked about just the education piece, having them understand why these constraints exist. And I think another great thing to wish for, but is I think probably the hardest thing, is we talked about semantics and purpose earlier. It's trying to understand from marketing what the purpose of this change is. That's very challenging, right? They're going to go ahead and have some promo, and they're going to say, well, we're only doing this promo for this reason, for this very specific, highly specific. And that's very unsystematic, right? Because you have this one snowflake in here that's way off system because of, things that marketing wants to do. And that's always going to be a challenge, I think. And I think marketing and those groups are most prone to that, which I think a system needs to kind of account for that sometimes, right? I mean, from a design system standpoint, we can't have all of the answers for everything, but we could certainly have lots of patterns and guidelines that allow us to recreate similar experiences as a user goes from homepage and beyond. So having something that does stand out in some cases can be exactly what is expected from the experience, right? That's the reason why ads stand out so badly in some minimal UIs, right? Because they want you to look at that thing as much as we don't want to click it. So there is some psychology behind it, but at the end of the day, it's just that collaboration meeting, that alignment meeting that says, what are the values for these things in the theme with these constraints, and these are the reasons the constraints are there. And if you have new data, let us know, and let's get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I mean, brand is your customer as much as the designer and engineering team, right? And making sure that you're understanding the world of your customer and how to enable them, just like your user of any other thing y'all are building, that's critical, right? And without those considerations, you're more likely to run into more of those issues where what they're trying to accomplish doesn't jive with what we've enabled, and that's what we want to avoid or get past. You also kind of touch on something that's relevant to another popular question here around. Again, I'll read this and then maybe abstract it a little bit. Do our design system visioneers, definitely you three, not me, here see potential singularity of design systems, best practices and guidelines for design systems, in where most of the basic stuff is universal and only abstract stuff is branded. So I see that's kind of related to what you were saying, Donnie, a little bit of the, generally we got to figure out what we can systematize and what we can't, but with the added flavor that kind of smacks of white label stuff of hey, how do we do that also in a brand, right? We've got global stuff. We've got things that are global mostly, but they show up differently in brands. How do you think about approaching those lines of distinction, or how to think about what are we going to try and control in these different circles? Anybody? Complex.
The unify thing is really interesting because I mean, at the core level, I do think we, generally speaking, have it mostly figured out. It's been a long time. We figured out how to do a button. As much as we want to go ahead and redesign buttons constantly, I remember the mirror button effect that blew up Twitter a couple months ago, where we're use your webcam and show your webcam in there. I'm just guys, we don't need this. Let the user just click the button. Actually, there was a TikTok, I think, too, where the CEO was yelling at its employees about spending $72,000 on a button for 2 weeks because of all the employees that were working on this button. And I feel the passion there, right? Because the button is a solved thing, really, when you really want to think about it. It's completely solved. And for us to go ahead and rehash it seems like a waste of time, where there are other larger problems that we could absolutely be tackling and absolutely trying to put our energy into. So yeah, I think a lot of it is solved problems, which is what frustrates me mostly, and why I kind of launched Design Systems House, because I'm taking myself out of that and putting myself in, removing all those problems that we keep talking about and focusing on newer ones. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to, stop rehashing things and, focus on different things, better things instead.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the movement to enable that imagination and creativity with design systems. It's less about the constraints and more about those constraints being the enablement for brand expression, because you get to spend your time delighting your users in the best, most imaginative ways. And going back to what we were talking about just before this, was there's then a method and a process for them as brand and as expression to bring that back to the table and say, hey, look, we want to do this amazing thing. It's creative, it's different, it sits slightly outside of the constraints that are there within the design system. The answer, for personally, this is maybe just a personal opinion, but I believe that that's high five. That's awesome. So you're doing something else that you've been enabled and given time to do, because you don't need to do all of this stuff that's already figured out. So I actually believe that it is that way around. It's like, yeah, the singularity, like, well, just taking care of the things you don't need to keep taking care of, then gives you that brand expression. And yeah, there isn't this one method, like, or process completely defined on how to then bring that back in and like enable that at scale to all of the different brands, maybe, when you're talking about brand expression. But there's definitely things that you can do and definitely things that you can put together to enable that. So yeah, I think definitely feel like feeling the pain of that CEO and what you're saying, Donnie. Yeah, just leave those parts. Like we can take care of that pretty quickly. And I think it enables that focus on, yeah, creativity, imagination, and brand expression.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up with design systems and other shared systems to begin with, is like, especially coming from the engineering side where it's like, yeah, like I said, like we have all these solved problems. Let's share all the solutions to the solved problems so we don't have to think about it and we can focus more on the like innovation and human side of it. And I think there's always going to be enough of the human side that there's not like, as much as I would love to have everything be very like, the singularity and have everything be very like process based or automated. I think there's still going to be that human aspect of it, but we're taking out all the solved problems and that, the things that everyone has been solving over time. Uh, but we're still having to like solve them in a way that's human for whichever team we're working with. So there's still going to be a bit of there's always going to be a bit of humanity to it, I guess. But we're leaving a lot of space for that. We're empowering that.
All about the human element, folks. Well, the question just popped in that I want to just jump on because we have love for the agency world here. A question about agency, in the agency world, white label design system and a theme for individual clients that are unconnected, question mark. If no, what's the shared baseline? The agency, so I spent about a decade in the agency world. I know Skim did. I know Mark and Donnie both consult, right? And the agency operation is fascinating to me because it's one of the biggest. There's so much opportunity for benefit of systems, not just in the way the engagement model and like generating more agency of record relationships, but in how you deliver internally, right? Agencies have turnover, right? How do you actually take institutional knowledge and make it last beyond your best ecom UX designer leaving, right? Are you still good at UX at the ecom UX when they leave? I don't know, right? If we have all those patterns codified in a way we can leverage and iterate on, we are, right? But also, how do we not start every engagement fresh, but like define a color palette and a theme, topography, spacing, and quickly have even medium fidelity things we can assemble and start to show possibilities, right? There's so much opportunity. But I find that some agencies are really embracing it and some are like, whoa, I can't use the same thing across different customers, even though we kind of do that in many ways anyway. So I think it's something that every agency should really stop and look at. And all of you that work with agencies should really, be asking your agencies about how do you get them to be enabled by a system you own. We do a lot of that working with customers to make the starting point for agencies is leverage our system and iterate, don't design more hero rotators for us. But also from an agency standpoint, there's a lot of ways to get around any concerns or ickiness of, reuse of solutions. I guarantee if you go to your team that builds Sitecore, AEM, right, there's a standard stack that isn't the off-the-shelf stack that they use to start every environment, right? And they're forked, they're cloned, right? It's not, no customers are necessarily sharing it, but you still don't need to reinvent the wheel for teams that have more throughput than a lot of product orgs, right? So I always down to chat with agency teams, but I think the opportunity there is huge. And it's such a critical part of most of our enterprise teams too, right? We work with a lot that they don't control a lot of the like design execution and sometimes even the technical execution. And so orchestrating all this stuff across like entities outside your walls with turnover that you can't control is like a whole nother level of complexity I didn't put on the slide there. But the agency world is again ripe for shakeup in this. I probably have time for one more question. I'm going to do a spicy one to throw it out to the group. And then we'll try and capture the other ones that we have, and we'll try and respond, asynchronously if we have your info. But again, if we don't, reach out to hello@knapsack.cloud, hit us up on social. We're always down to talk shop, clearly. Last one I'll throw out to the group is, will AI solve theming?
Oh,
So happy we got an AI question, finally.
you did leave the
Almost
spicy
made
one
it
to
through a webinar
last.
without mentioning AI.
Come on, man. Will it solve it? By itself? Yeah, I think
Just say no and end the webinar. Is that where we're at?
yeah, no, that we're all good. Thank you very much. It's been a great time. Uh, um, I think, I mean, I've got an opinion that AI and us as users using AI are working in harmony together to solve problems anyway, right? So not alone, it won't do it. Will it solve theming by itself? Not yet, at least, and I'm going to go with the answer no for now. But together, it will maybe support getting to those answers faster. So like I see it as like your AI in conjunction with you as you try and solve this problem around theming, and therefore gives you suggestions, gives you prompts, gives you things that support you to get there more efficiently, more faster, and more effectively. That's my like 3 second or maybe 10 second answer that I'm gonna fire out there
I mean,
and
that's
give it back to the group.
generative AI isn't good enough yet for us to put this stuff in our enterprise production applications, like generated code, in our opinion, right? But what AI is really good at is helping you shortcut the human process that takes iteration to come up. Like I use it to draft emails and all kinds of stuff, right? Just to give me a pass that I didn't have to think through. And we see a lot of opportunities for that in things like even naming stuff, right? We may not be here yet, but being able to point AI at a component library and understand states based on React component, like it's getting better, right? Maybe documenting decently your components. And so figuring out what semantic names you need, coming up with your fleshed out color palette with all the sort of different, shades. We definitely see a lot of opportunity for teams to accelerate parts of that, but it's not solving all the problems yet.
It's funny. I see that question and I immediately go, what part of theming are you talking about? Right? Because there's so many different facets of the feeding. I mean, I think, foundationally, you might be thinking, okay, I'm going to solve the curation step, right? That's that human piece of like, okay, I'm going to figure out what the colors are against these tokens. But what about how the theme gets served to our products and our experiences? Is that the thing that you want to be solved through AI? Do you want to solve what the structure of all this data going through our tools looks like? There's lots of things that we are trying to solve when it comes to theming, which is that complexity thing I guess we're talking about. So there's lots of opportunities there that we can have some computer help in, but ultimately, will it itself solve all those problems, in one fell swoop? Absolutely not, right? We need to, get focused on specific parts of that problem, which will have specific needs, and then solve them appropriately.
Yet again, it turns out there's a lot of pieces to all this, and we all need to look holistically and chat with each other if we're going to figure any of this out. So there's your takeaway again for today. I know we're past time, so thank you all for sticking with us. It's been awesome. I love the questions, the engagement. Always down to talk. Please reach out to us. Find us on social. We'll retweet something from Donnie, so you'll find him too. Appreciate you all being here and sharing part of your day with us. Thanks.